Well, hello, my millennial besties, and welcome back to another episode of the Millennial Reset. If you are new here and you are a millennial that's feeling maybe a little bit discouraged, maybe a little disillusioned, maybe just straight up stuck and burnt out, then you are in the right place. I am your host, Peter Goose. I'm just another one of you. I'm just a millennial that just happened to hit the brick wall of burnout multiple times in my life. And I went down a rabbit hole of the brain, mind, and body science of burnout and have since decided to create this community to hopefully help you heal a little faster than I did. So thank you so much for being here. I am super excited for today's episode because we have a friend on today, a guest on who I feel like is kind of like living the life that we all secretly dream about and are striving for. So I'm not going to spoil it for you. I'm just going to let her tell you herself. Desiree, hello, hello, and welcome to the Millennial Reset.
Hi, Peter. I'm so excited to be here. It took a little while to get me on the show, but it's worth it.
Yes, we are so happy to have you. Um, let's dive right in, girlfriend. Tell us what your life is like today. What have you done that so many of us are thinking about doing but have hesitated to pull the plug?
Okay. Well, I live in a tiny house on wheels on the backside of a 5-acre plot of land.
Uh, and I mean, Desiree's just like saying this kind of nonchalantly, like it's no big deal, but like she lives in a tiny house, like we all dream about. You've got your own garden there too, right? Like you've got your own plot of land, so you're kind of a little bit on the self-sustaining life path as well, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I was lucky to be able to have access to this space. We had a friend of a friend who when we were really looking for somewhere to put the tiny house after we finished building it, we really didn't know where we were going to end up. And we just kind of blasted out under our social medias like, does anyone have somewhere where we can live? These are the things we need. And a friend just responded, like, hey, I know this person who we went to high school with who has this property. They would probably have you. And so I reached out to them and they let me know that absolutely they would have me and my partner. And we moved onto this property. It was in 2020 that we moved onto this property, like as the pandemic was happening.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and we weren't quite 100% finished building at that point either, so we were finishing up things and like sort of getting situated here, but fast forward 4 years and we are very established here. We have quite the good sized gardens. We're really lucky that the landlords are really accepting of us being able to do things that we'd like to on the land, like create garden plots and I don't know, we have like an outdoor shower. Like they let us kind of do whatever we want, as long as we just sort of like are respectful of the land.
Wow. So, okay, Desiree, let us just like live through you vicariously for a few moments here and just like walk us through what does a day in the life of Desiree look like?
Okay, I have like a pretty set routine right now, so I can give you a pretty good day in the life. Um, so right now I wake up in the morning at about 6:30, and that's when my partner gets up and gets ready for work. So a lot of the times he will like make me my tea and like bring it to me in bed in our loft, and the sun starts pouring in at that time. So the sun's pouring in, my cat is snuggled with me, I'm drinking my Earl Grey or my orange pekoe, and I'm having a little chat with my partner before he heads to work. And then I usually get up and I make myself breakfast and I probably check out TikTok for a bit, and then I get myself sort of ready to go, and I have a yoga class that I go to every morning at 9 in the morning. And then I kind of like will do errands or go have tea with my mom because we live in the same town and we go to yoga together. And then oftentimes I will like come home and just sort of like linger in the house. I really like spending time in my house. And I will like prep food or I'll go outside and I'll work in the yard. It's gardening season right now, so I'm like starting plants and yeah, it's
Yeah.
a lot of stuff like that. And then usually a typical evening is partner and I make dinner and then we snuggle up and watch movies in the loft or on the couch. He likes the loft and I like the couch.
Yeah. I don't know about everybody else that's like listening to this right now, but like I'm just imagining myself living that life right now, and my stress and my cortisol levels have just like dropped drastically all of a sudden. So Desiree, yes, thank you for letting us live vicariously through you here for just a brief moment of time. um let's go back in time because obviously life wasn't always like this. You mentioned that this all started around like 2020, but take us back before then. Like, what was your life like then? What were you doing? How was your mental health? Like, give us the before picture.
Totally. So the before would be, I think if we go like way back first and just sort of like get the ground basis to why living in a tiny house was important to me. I grew up on like a family farm. I was homeschooled for most of my younger years until about high school. So I spent a lot of time with my family and I always wanted to like build myself like a little house, like a little playhouse or like a space that I could go do my crafts or my arts. But I just didn't have the skills to put the pieces of wood together like that. So it was this image I had in my head as a kid. And then as I grew up and I did go to high school, finished high school, I went into college and university and through my process of like college and university, I didn't my mental health wasn't the best. I had a lot of like anxiety and depression, mostly anxiety. It was difficult for me to complete my degree, but I did it. And I went to the University of British Columbia and completed my Bachelor of Fine Arts with a major in visual arts in 2016. And at that time, I had been in school like forever. Like I was 26 when I finished my degree, and I wasn't even sure like what I was gonna do next in life. And I had met my partner in 2013 and dragged him from Alberta to BC with me. And we sort of started thinking, okay, what could we do in terms of like lifestyle that would be sustainable? We were living in Vancouver at the time, so like rental was just it wasn't going to be there forever because it was just unsustainable for us. So we ended up kind of like shifting gears and thinking about how we could do something that would work for us. And the idea of the tiny house started like blossoming at that time. And he was really and is really into design. So he actually started like playing around on like Google, I forget the program, Google SketchUp. And he like designed the whole house and like in 2017 is when we broke ground. We bought a trailer and we started building. But even throughout that process, like I was working part time, random jobs, like kind of struggling to find my footing in the world, not really knowing how to have like a steady job. I, that has been something I've struggled with for most of my life is like how to have like a steady job. And so the tiny house to me was a little bit of a solution to like the pressures of having to have a full-time job all the time. If I built my house, then I wouldn't have as much payments as maybe somebody else who bought a bigger house or an apartment. And
Right.
so that was sort of my concept, and my partner was very supportive of that. He's very okay with working full time. It doesn't phase him, but for me, it really has a pretty significant impact on my mental health.
Yeah.
So this was sort of this was the path that we decided to take.
hmm You know, you just like gave me this like, I don't
Yeah.
know, aha moment of sorts of like, I wonder if the reason why so many of us millennials like are striving for this tiny house life is like, you remember y'all like back in the 80s and 90s, like growing up. I don't know the rest of you, but like for me, I grew up kind of like on a farm sort of thing, like not really like that rural, but rural enough where like we had woods nearby. And I just remember as a child, like always going into the woods, and like my
Yeah.
favorite thing to do was building forts. Like there was something about just like having your own space as a kid to like go and escape from, to like go and escape all the trauma. And I'm like, I wonder if that's why we all want a tiny house now, is like we're just trying to relive our 90s forts days or something. Because yeah, I mean, I'm the same way. I'm like, I always had
Yeah.
these images in my head as a kid of like, I just want like my own little trailer with my own little, tiny kitchen and my comfy bed. Um, so yeah, I just I'm not gonna say I'm jealous of you, Desiree, but like I'm just a slightly envious. Um, so okay, let's talk about this next. Let's talk about the process because I'm sure everybody is wondering, like, okay, even if I do want to, actually do this, if I want to make this kind of drastic change and move to the woods in a tiny house, like, talk us through how did you do this? Like, what was the process? What did you have to do first? And how did you get things like electricity? Like, what are all of the things that you had to do to get this thing up and running?
Yeah. So my advice would be to anyone who's considering tiny house living would be to really take the time in the beginning to figure out what the regulations are in your area because they differ from state to state, country to country. Like I'm up in Canada, it's different here than in the US. So I know the US has a lot going on down there for tiny houses, so it's definitely possible. But just figure out those logistics first.
And so, like, where do you get a tiny house? If somebody is shopping around for a tiny house, do you just like Google tiny homes for sale or like,
Yeah, so if you're wanting to go like a route that's quite easy and seamless, if you don't want to build it yourself, which is how we did ours, um, shopping tiny house builders is probably the easiest way to do it. I will say that it is a little bit more expensive, but if you asked me if I were to go back, I would probably just buy it.
yeah,
Not because I didn't enjoy the process of building it, but because it was a lot of work, and it put a lot of strain on my relationship.
I bet.
But worth it. But yeah, there's if you Google search tiny house builders in your area, you will find tiny houses available. There's actually like people who will just sell them on the marketplace. I see them on like Facebook Marketplace all of the time. And you can buy them in all sorts of different forms. You can buy them as like a pre-built shell, so you can finish the inside. But yeah, there's just like different parameters that you're expected to meet. But also, if you're on the back end of 5 acres, then and no one cares, then it might not matter that
Yeah,
much.
totally. Yeah, I keep seeing all these things pop up on my like Instagram feed around like shipping container tiny homes. I guess like that's the new thing now. It's just like go buy a shipping container and turn it into a house. And I'm like, right, I could do that. That's doable. As long as I've got like a pretty view, that's all I need.
Seems that seems so hard to me.
Yeah. I
That
mean,
like seems so difficult. You'd need like things to cut the metal. Like this is all like wood frame built. So this is built exactly the way that you would build a traditional house, just on a smaller scale. Like yeah, it's plumbed. It's fitted with gas. Like we have a propane stove. Our water is heated by propane. Like we have electrical. We're basically like a 50 amp plug that we plug into a wall.
yeah.
Like it's pretty straightforward. I think like building out of a sea can would be like a whole nother level.
Yeah. Maybe we'll just again, it's a dream in the back of my mind. I'm like, it sounds like a good idea, but then I think about like the actuality of it, and I was like, maybe not so much. So let's talk about like today, right? Like you've been in the house for what, about 4 years now, and talk us through like what's different about your life today? Like what has changed? Not just like your normal daily routines, but like especially kind of on like the mental health mindset side of things. Like what has changed for you both externally and internally?
Well, externally, like all of this, like living in a smaller space has allowed my life to feel smaller.
Mm,
I don't have a lot of the same concerns and worries I feel like that a lot of people with bigger homes or like larger commitments have. My house is like under 300 square feet. So like just to give you perspective, like it's quite small.
yeah.
But that allows me to keep my circle really tight. I was just having a conversation with a friend about where we put our energy and how we decide where that like line of our circle of concern is going to be. And so when I was driving into my house, the property the other day, I was just like, wow, like this is my circle. Like this is it right here. Like it's me, my partner, my cat. Like
Yeah.
and so I have that here. Internally, it has been a fairly complex process to get to where I am right now. And I was saying to Peter in our pre-episode chat that yeah, I wasn't able to be on the show earlier because of some of the processes that I was going through. I just am on the other side of like a pretty severe burnout, which sort of snowballed and manifested itself probably in just December last year. So, yeah, I'm just sort of like in the process of healing. But moving into the tiny house was like after like 3 years of building was like it was just this buildup of stress and like was so excited to finally move in and COVID hit. And it was like, oh shit.
Yeah.
Like now we're like isolated in a space that I'm not even used to yet. With my partner who I've spent every day with building a hat. Well, we built it part time for 3 years. That's why it took us so long. But like that I've spent so much time like next to working on a project, like having to problem solve and stress. And there was a lot of things that we had to work through interpersonally with each other. And honestly, it probably almost broke us up,
Yeah.
just to be frank. But we got through it, and then we moved in here in like June 2020, I think it was. So yeah, like right as everything was getting really complicated. And we realized that like this was going to be happening for quite a significant amount of time. And at that time, I actually had to leave my job that I was at because I worked with children and I love working with children, but the germs was like freaking me out. So I had to leave my job and I ended up finding a job like in a local bakery. And it was like a small sort of wholesale situation. So that was a lot easier. But over the next like 3 4 years working there, I just was working full time. I was like it just got to the point where I like did severely get burnt
Yeah.
out and had to leave. And I was so fortunate to be able to leave because of my lifestyle. Like had I not had this set up for myself, I would not have been able to
Yeah.
leave. I would have been stuck. And I think that's one of my biggest fears, or maybe not fears, but motivations to live an alternative lifestyle is that like I don't want to feel stuck or forced to work a job or stay in a situation that's unhealthy for me. I'm sad that it took me like as long as it did for me to realize that it was so unhealthy for me. But at the same token, like I'm so grateful that I had the opportunity to just come home.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, it seems to me
Yeah.
like, for a lot of people that I've talked about that have kind of gone through a similar experience of kind of whether it be going off the grid or just taking a break from regular life for a while is like you said, right? It kind of gives you that break to just be able to heal and take at least some of the extra pressure that we oftentimes put on ourselves because of living in capitalistic America. But let's talk real talk here for a second because we were talking about this a little bit before of like what are some of the things that you thought would change for you because you were living this different lifestyle, you were hoping for maybe less stress in your life. What are some things that you thought would change that actually didn't change, like real talk?
Yeah, I think that I thought um that I wouldn't be so anxious, and that I wouldn't deal with like sort of the chronic worry that I've always dealt with. That I genuinely thought it was the product of being in university and then, not really having a place to go, not really having a job. Like I thought those were the things that were the sources of my anxiety. But when I got into the tiny house, I was, living in the space that I dreamed about. I had met the person that I was going to spend the rest of my life with. Like I had this full-time job at a really cool little bakery. Like I had all of these things going for me and I still like came home and like felt really like unwell a lot of the times and dealt with a lot of like chronic anxiety. and that for me, I think that was like the hardest part. And also like really like I got married in 2021. We were like supposed to be a 2020 wedding. Actually, I think I got married in 2022.
Something like
Um,
that.
don't worry about it. It was a 2020 wedding. I don't even know what happened. But in relation to that, like the social pressure that is put on you as like someone in the stage of life that us millennials are in,
Yeah.
like there's a lot of social pressure for us to have certain things or yeah, like housing. Like and everyone in my life is super proud of me for this and so I'm lucky for that, but like when it came to my wedding it was like, oh well you need to have this and you need to do this and da 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 and I was like, okay, like this is the exact reason that I don't participate in like these structured social things is because I don't like all of this pressure. And I thought by getting away from it that I could escape it, but the social pressure still
Yeah.
exists in different areas, right? And so, you know, yeah, I think even turning 30, I was like, I'm supposed to have babies. Like, and it took me some, like I just was like, oh, I have a uterus. I should make
Yeah.
babies. And I'm like, no, like I don't think that I think that we all need to take the time to think about what we want because ultimately there's a lot of social pressure on us.
Yeah.
So those things don't go away.
Yeah. And I love what you brought up about kind of this whole idea of like, we live in this world of materialism where it's like, yeah, when you have a wedding and it's everybody's going to be like, okay, here's your gift registry and I'm going to get you all these things that you're only going to use one time and then never going to use again. So I'm curious to hear from you, Desiree, like when you think about, obviously you can only have so many things in a tiny house. You don't have a whole lot of room for things, right? But like when you're making decisions about like what you're going to spend your money on, what's the process for you in your mind now? Right? Like what are the questions that you ask yourself that's like, okay, is this something that I'm going to spend my money on?
Yeah. It's actually funny because I grew up extremely frugal, like homeschooled in the bush.
Yeah.
we we didn't like have a ton of money. And so growing up, like I wasn't a big spender. The most money I ever spent on something was my degree. And my partner is very he's open to spending. He's cool with spending. Like he doesn't mind it. And so I'll be honest, like it's kind of been a reversal for me where like I would have never like spent money on some of the things that I'm going to spend money on, but I'm so intentional about the purpose of those things. Like I actually like things for my garden. If they're things for my garden, if they're things for like cooking.
Yeah.
Those are my two like favorite activities. So if they're things for cooking and they're things for gardening, I can justify them and budget for them. And that is exciting for me. But I don't have a ton of space. Like I said, like it's very small. So it does restrict what I'm able to buy. Like I'm not out buying a bunch of stuff all the time. And if I do buy something new and I already have one of those things, it has to be because I'm replacing it and I'm getting rid of the other thing.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day
Yeah.
of like now that, I've gone back to work full time, but like during that time, especially when I wasn't working and like not bringing in like a full-time income, um, when I was making those decisions, I got to this point where I was like, is this going to bring me sustained joy? And I think the key word there for me was like sustained, right? Because like there's so many things where it's like I love candles, right? Like I fucking love candles. I have so
Yeah.
many candles around my house. But candles run out, right? And then you have to go buy another candle. And like, yes, I'm still going to treat myself to candles, but I'm like,
Yeah.
when I'm making, especially like a big purchasing decision, if I'm going to go on vacation somewhere, right? I'm like, is this experience? I'll give you a quick example here. And this is like, oh my gosh, I hope they're not listening right now. But one of my friends had a wedding. And I was in that space where I was like, I don't have the energy. I don't have the social battery right now to go to a wedding. The location was a location that like I didn't really want to go to. And so I like asked myself, I'm like, okay, is this going to bring me joy, sustain joy, or is this going to bring me stress? Anyways, long story short, I didn't end up going and I didn't have regrets about it because I was
Yeah.
like, I would much rather spend my
Yeah.
money and my time doing things that are actually going to make me feel joyful as opposed to what everybody else expects of me, right? And I'm sure that's probably similar to what you went
Yeah.
through too, and moving into a tiny home is like, what are the things that we need, versus like, what are the things that we want, and finding that balance there too. So,
Yeah, and like the I really relate to what you just said. I've noticed myself being a lot more choosy with what social events I'm going to do, especially because I'm on the other side of a burnout. So
yeah.
I am so picky about what I'm going to do, and I actually love it though. Like I'm like, "Oh, no. I don't want to do that.
Uh-huh.
I'm good. Respectfully decline."
But yeah, I'm curious to hear about that too. Like when you do have those moments, because they still come up where you get like the high levels of burnout and stress, the burnout, maybe you start seeping back in, the anxiety, so on and so forth. And those things you can't just run away from them, right? Like they're still going to happen. But what is it now about your lifestyle, and being in, in the countryside on this plot of land with less pressure? What is it about this lifestyle that allows you to cope with those feelings more easily? Because again, they're not just going to go away. You can't get rid of them, but is there anything about this new lifestyle of yours that allows you to be able to just better deal with stress and anxiety?
I think it's very quiet, and that's really helpful for me. I definitely am a person who deals with like an auditory sensitivity. So having a quiet space, and I think that's super relatable for so many people. We live in a very noisy
Yeah.
world, and especially if you're our age and you have a family and all those things, like it's very loud and overwhelming. And so taking space, my house is that space, but you can always create that space. Taking the space to like have stillness and quietness to really allow yourself to like think clearly on like what's going on, and like listening to the experience that your body's having is probably one of the things that I'm valuing the most. Like typically when I go out and do something, I need to come home and like pad, which is like laying down on my couch and putting my weighted blanket on and just taking 15 minutes to like decompress essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And then if I'm quiet with myself, that helps me understand, and journaling. So quiet space and journaling are like two of the most effective ways that I can work through feelings of overwhelm.
Yeah. I
And
love that.
therapy.
And therapy, yes, that always helps. Um, so yeah, that was going to be one of my questions for you too. I'm curious for those of us that are out here. Let's start off with like those that are ready to take that leap, that truly do have the dream of moving into a tiny home, having the
Mhm.
land, having the garden. Let's start off with that group first. What would be your one piece of unsolicited advice for that population of millennials?
Oh my gosh. Okay, like I get so absolutely psyched out of my mind when people tell me that they're going to do this, cuz it's like I I just get so excited.
Yeah.
So I met a lady the other day who is living in an RV, and she was like a teller at a store, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, you live in an RV? I live in a tiny house. This is so exciting." Like, and she like I think like finding a community of support is really helpful. So I am always down to talk to people about their experience going through a tiny house situation, like building or buying or whatever their choices are. Like I'm always open to like chatting with people because I actually genuinely find it really cool.
Yeah.
But there's lots of like online platforms like Facebook, lots of like TikTok accounts I started following with people who are living alternatively. I would say just find a community, like find some people to talk to who can relate to you. And then also like it's gonna probably be a big adjustment, and you don't have to know what that means. Like you don't have to anticipate feeling stressed, just know that it's probably going to be an adjustment, and like to have a lot of grace with yourself around that.
Yeah.
Just make sure you're making time and space for yourself and doing things that you love too. Like make sure you're making time to do things that you love, especially if you're going the building route. Like I was so heavily focused on the build, like completely focused on it, that for like 3 years of a part-time build, like I didn't really have much of another life, and I would do that differently
Yeah.
for sure.
Totally. Let's talk about the flip
Hmm.
side, though. For those individuals that are out there that can't go build a tiny house, they have, kids, there's just not, they need more space, right? If tiny living and living slower living is maybe, the physical reality of slower living in a tiny house is not a reality for them. What is the one thing that you've learned about yourself in all of this, regardless of the physical location of being like in a tiny house? Like for everybody else that's wanting more peace, that's wanting more calm, that's wanting less anxiety for themselves, but they can't go off the grid, they can't build the tiny house. What do you say to those folks?
I think that being in a tiny house pushes you outdoors a lot. I think that's been really helpful. If you have the opportunity to spend some time in nature, like I said, like there's that element of quietness, but there's just that element of grounding. Like take your shoes off, go stand on the ground,
Yeah.
like spend time in nature, just find moments of stillness. Be honest with yourself when you feel overwhelmed and say no to things. Learning to say no is huge. I mean, that's not just from living in the tiny house. That was just the process I've gone through for the last 4 years. Understanding how to have boundaries.
Yeah.
And like, if you want to live a smaller life, you can do that by setting up a structure of boundaries rather than a structure of a house.
Oh, I love that. Structure of boundaries instead of structures of a house. That's so good. Um, Desiree, it has been an absolute pleasure hearing your story. I'm sure that so many people are going to walk away from this and start Googling how to build a tiny house in the middle of nowhere. But before we let you go, Desiree, tell us a little bit about like, I know you have the social media channel. I want you to tell folks about that and what they can expect to hear from you if they decide to follow your journey more. But yeah, tell us about like what's next for you.
Mm, okay. Yeah. Actually TikTok's been a cool platform for me for the last 4 years. It's actually where I found and met Peter. Well, I think you found me, but
Yeah.
um but the social media has really been helpful for me to like understand and share my experience. And so for the next little while, I am still on a leave from work, and I've resigned from that position. So the next like 6 months are going to be really interesting because I'm gonna have to figure out what I'm gonna do for some work,
Hmm.
for some moolah. So I will be sharing that on my platform. I have a TikTok account. That's pretty much where I primarily post now. Like Instagram is sort of to me now.
Yeah.
um, but I really just enjoy sharing like a day-to-day life experience on TikTok. So I do share about my house, I do share about my garden, I do make silly videos. But a lot of the talk that I've been having on there has been around mental health. And I was also diagnosed with ADHD in December while experiencing the height of my burnout.
Hmm.
So it put a lot of pieces together for me as to why I was dealing with so much anxiety and difficulties in my 20s with my degree and trying to get a job, and the things that I've struggled with kind of were made sense of by my recent diagnosis. So I'm still learning about ADHD, especially like adult diagnosed woman ADHD.
Yeah.
Like it's just a whole thing. I think on average, it's like men are diagnosed with ADHD at the age of 6, and for women, it's at the age of 30. So,
Yeah.
like, there's a big discrepancy. And so, understanding that mental health condition has like helped me make sense of my life and why I operate the way I do. So, I share a lot about that on my social media. I think mostly I just share about what is happening now in my life. So if people wanna follow along, this is always part of it. Like the house is always part of it. The garden's always part of it. But then there's the like deeper stuff of like what I'm going through interpersonally.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah, and the social media channel, by the way, is the Pint Size Life. Is that right?
Pint sized life. Yeah.
Pint Size Life on the Tiki assuming that TikTok doesn't go away.
Mhm.
I don't think it's going to get banned, but
Yeah. Oh my
oh,
gosh, you
I
guys, that's
know.
wild.
But I'm
I mean, I am on Instagram too. I don't share on there, but if you want to see, actual like images from the early parts of the build, that's where I posted them. So I had like the Instagram channel as like the like photo gallery of the
Oh,
build. So there's
nice.
actually quite a few interesting things on there. I just don't post on there regularly anymore because TikTok. But if something were to happen to TikTok, I would resort back to Instagram.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I'll just say too, Desiree, from like, having been following you and following each other for the past several months here is like one of the things that I just love about like every time that I see you pop up on my feed is like you are 100% authentic. And like I know for me, like anytime that I get
Oh,
on like TikTok and I start like if I have to like post something, all of a sudden 10,000 different thoughts run through my brain of like, oh my God, am I going to say the right thing? Do I need to redo this 10 more times to make it perfect? And it's like when you come up, I'm like,
oh,
Peter, just be more like that. Just be yourself, get on camera and talk to people about what's going on. So I just want to say I appreciate that so much about you. And I look up to you for that fact of just you're an open book. And I think that's what so many people want to see right now is just real people having real talk on social media. So thank you so much for coming on.
oh my
Thank you for being you. I'm going to ask you one final question here just to kind of wrap it up for this episode on the Millennial Reset. We talk a lot about this whole idea of getting to that point in your life where you redefine like what does success and happiness like really mean for me as opposed to like what we've all been conditioned for of go get the college degree, have the kids, get married, live in the white picket fence house in the suburbs, right? But like for you, what does success and or happiness mean to you today?
yeah. Okay. Hey, this is beautiful. Also, thank you for the
Of
compliments. You're such a
course.
sweetheart. I love seeing you on social media too. But happiness, gosh, I think it's just being present, like trying to stay in the moment and the practice of like actively bringing myself back into the present moment has been something I'm really exercising lately. Yoga has really helped me with that. So I did not like yoga. I was not a yoga person.
Uh-huh.
I lifted weights and played soccer, but honestly, like it's if you can open yourself up to that, like it's such a good access point and then you can practice those techniques in your own space and time to allow you to stay present because I'm looking out my big bay window right now and the sun is shining and the sky is blue and the grass is green and it's all so bright and beautiful and that's what's happening right now,
Yeah.
like, and that's all that there is. So there's a whole lot of other noise going on and trust me it's circulating in the brain space, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for those that are listening right now, they can't see this, but like I'm looking at you on the Zoom camera right now, and you've got this staircase behind you that's like completely lit up with like this angelic sunshine light coming through the windows there. It's just a very beautiful scene. Anyways, Desiree, thank you so much again for coming on, sharing your story, allowing us to live vicariously through you for all of us that are striving for this slower paced living type of lifestyle. And I think most importantly, like I mentioned, just thank you for being you. Thank you for being the most authentic version of yourself and just showing up and allowing us to kind of be part of your journey. And thank you all for listening to another episode of the Millennial Reset. If you like what you heard, I am horrible about asking for support, but I'm going to do it anyways. Please be sure to subscribe and follow wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you really want to support, you could share it with one of your millennial besties that maybe needs to hear this today. Maybe, just maybe, give it a good rating on Spotify or Apple, wherever you listen to your podcasts. And I will see you all next time on the next episode of The Millennial Reset.